The note came through the gap at the bottom of the door. He almost didn't see it. He was sitting on the floor of the hallway outside courtroom 3 in the Denton County Family Court, back against the wall, knees up, because there were no chairs left and the wooden bench was full, and he had been here for 2 hours already, and the floor was as good a place as any to wait out the rest of whatever this day was going to be. His helmet was between his feet. His cut was on, the way it was always on, which was everywhere and always, because the cut was not a costume he put on and took off. It was what he wore the way other men wore their skin. His phone was in his hand, but he had stopped looking at it 40 minutes ago when the battery had gone to 9%, and he had decided not to use what was left on things that did not matter. He was not here for the family court. He was here because his chapter's legal contact had an office on the second floor, and the meeting had been about a permit, and it had run long, and when it ended the elevator was out, and the stairwell on this side of the building was locked for maintenance, and the other stairwell, the one that worked, required walking through the family court hallway, and he had walked through the family court hallway and seen that the bench was full and people were sitting on the floor, and he had sat too, because waiting with people who are waiting is the kind of thing you do without deciding to do it. He had been waiting for 40 minutes when the note came through the gap, a folded square of paper, small, the size of something torn from the corner of a larger sheet. It slid through the inch of clearance between the bottom of the door marked Family Court Waiting Room B and the floor, and it stopped against his boot, and he looked at it for a moment before he picked it up. He unfolded it. It had been folded 4 times precisely by careful small hands. It said, in the careful, uncertain printing of a child who is trying her very best, "Please help me. My name is Grace. I'm 6. They are going to take me away from my grandma. Please, please, please." He sat very still. He read it again. He read it a 3rd time. He looked at the door. On the other side of it, somewhere in the family court waiting room, was a 6-year-old girl named Grace who had folded a piece of paper 4 times and slid it under a door on the chance that whoever was on the other side was someone who could help. Mac Deaton, 47 years old, Denton County Chapter, Lone Star Riders out of Denton, Texas, looked at the note in his hand and felt something happen that he had not felt in a long time, which was the specific and irreversible certainty of a man who has just understood what he is supposed to do. He put the note in his chest pocket. He stood up. He opened the door. He could not leave. What he found on the other side of that door, and what he did with what he found, would take the rest of the afternoon and all of the following morning, and change more lives than he went in expecting to change, including, in the end, his own. The Denton County Family Court sat in a building on Hickory Street that had been a bank in a previous life and still had the proportions of a building that had been built to communicate solidity and permanence, high ceilings, stone floors, the kind of architecture that says things decided here are decided. The family court had occupied the ground floor for 22 years, and in that time the waiting rooms had received the specific institutional updating that government spaces receive when the budget allows for function and not for comfort. Fluorescent lights, stackable chairs, a water cooler in the corner, a window that looked out onto the parking lot, rather than anything you would want to look at. The hallway outside the courtrooms had a wooden bench that seated 8 and a stretch of linoleum floor for whoever came after the 8. It was a Thursday in March, and the hallway was full. Mac Deaton had arrived at 1:15 for his meeting upstairs and had been in the hallway since 2:45 when the meeting ended, and the elevator had offered its situation. He was 47 years old and had been with Lone Star Riders for 13 years, the last 4 as chapter president, and he had the specific equilibrium of a man who has learned that most waiting resolves itself if you are patient with it. He was large, the size of a man who had spent his 20s on oil rigs and 30s building custom motorcycles, and who still worked with his hands every day in the shop he ran on the edge of Denton, with the kind of face that asked questions and waited for the answers and did not fill the silence in between. He was heading to San Antonio after this. His niece was getting married on Saturday. He had 4 days. He had planned to leave Denton by 3 and make San Antonio by dark and spend Friday with his sister's family doing the things that families do in the days before a wedding, which involved a great deal of food and a certain amount of careful navigation of the opinions of people who loved each other and had strong feelings about table settings. He had been looking forward to it. He was still looking forward to it when the note came under the door. He had carried one thing with him for 11 years, without it ever being fully put down, the memory of a call he had received from his sister when her youngest was 3 years old. A call that had said something was wrong in the house and had turned out to be exactly what the call sounded like, and which had resolved well only because his sister had people around her and resources available, and a brother who had arrived on a motorcycle in 4 hours and had not left until the situation was resolved. He had been 36. He had known what to do. He had done it. He had thought about that call on the days when he wondered whether any of it, the chapter, the rides, the years on the road, was going toward anything. He stopped wondering when the note came under the door. Before I tell you who was on the other side of that door, subscribe right now if you're new and drop your city in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. I want to see the map. I read every single one now. Back to the family court on Hickory Street. Back to the waiting room behind the door. Because there was a little girl on the other side who had a name and a grandmother and a story that had been running wrong for 6 months through a system that moves very slowly and does not explain itself to 6-year-olds. I need you to know her before you hear what Mac found when he opened the door. Her name was Grace Elaine Whitmore. She was 6 years old, and she had her grandmother's cheekbones and her mother's stubbornness and a gap between her front teeth that the kindergarten teacher at Denton Elementary had mentioned in the fall with the specific warmth that teachers reserve for details they find genuinely endearing. She had dark red hair, which she wore in 2 braids that her grandmother plaited every morning with the care of someone who understands that the morning ritual is its own form of love. And she had freckles across the bridge of her nose that deepened in summer and faded in winter and were at their winter paleness now in March. She was in the 1st grade. She read 2 years above her level, which her teacher had noted, and which Grace herself was aware of, in the way that children are aware of things that distinguish them, without quite having the vocabulary to name the distinction. She read everything she could find. The cereal box at breakfast, the signs on the highway from the back seat, the notices on the bulletin board at the library, where her grandmother took her on Saturday mornings. She read because she loved it, and because the library on Saturday mornings was one of the fixed points of her week, and because her grandmother had been bringing her since she was 3, and they had a system for choosing books that they had developed together over 3 years and which worked. She lived with her grandmother. She had lived with her grandmother since she was 4 months old, when her mother, her grandmother's daughter, a woman named Kara, who had been 23, and who had been in the specific kind of difficulty that 23-year-olds get into when nobody caught it early enough, had asked her mother to take Grace for a little while, and the little while had become permanent in the way that things become permanent, when everyone involved understands that permanent is the right word, even if nobody has said it yet. Her grandmother's name was Iris Whitmore. Iris was 67 years old and had been raising Grace for 5.5 of those years with the specific organized devotion of a woman who had raised one child and understood what it required and was doing it again without complaint and without making it anyone's business but her own. She was a retired school librarian. She had a house on Mockingbird Lane with a garden that she tended seriously and a bedroom that Grace had decorated with her own drawings, which covered 2 full walls and had spilled onto the 3rd, and which Iris had never once suggested limiting. She made Grace's lunches with notes inside, not every day, that would have diminished them, but on Mondays and Thursdays, because those were the days Grace had said in September were her least favorite, without being able to explain why, and Iris had not asked her to explain. She had simply started putting notes in on Mondays and Thursdays. The notes said things like, "You are exactly who you are supposed to be," and "The gap between your teeth is my favorite thing," and "Tuesday is coming and it will be better." Grace kept them in a shoebox under her bed. 6 months ago, Kara had come back. She had come back in the specific way that people come back when they have worked on themselves and have reason to believe the working has been sufficient and want to demonstrate the sufficiency, improved, documented, with letters from a counselor and a stable address and a job that had lasted 4 months and a genuine and visible love for her daughter that nobody who looked at Kara disputed. Nobody disputed the love. The question, the one that had been in family court for 6 months and had not yet been fully resolved, was whether love was equivalent to readiness, and what readiness required, and who got to measure it. The Guardian ad litem had a report. The caseworker had a recommendation. The judge had a hearing scheduled for today, Thursday, at 3:30. Iris Whitmore had an attorney, appointed through legal aid, who was prepared to argue that disruption of a stable placement was not in the child's best interest when the child was 5.5 years old and had been in the placement since infancy and was attached and thriving, and had 2 walls of drawings and a shoebox of Monday-Thursday notes and a Saturday morning library system that worked. Grace had been told she was going to the courthouse today for a meeting about where she was going to live. She had been told this in the careful, age-appropriate way that adults tell children difficult things, which means she had been told the shape of it without the details, and she had understood the shape of it because she was 6 and already read 2 years above her level and had been listening to adults discuss her situation in careful voices for 6 months and had assembled, from the pieces she had collected, an understanding that was not complete and was not wrong. She understood that the meeting today was important. She understood that the outcome of the meeting was not certain. She had been sitting in the family court waiting room with Iris and the legal aid attorney for 45 minutes when she found the piece of paper in the attorney's folder, blank on one side, the back of a draft document, and folded it 4 times and slid off her chair and went to the door and looked at the gap at the bottom of it. She had heard from outside the specific sound of someone shifting against the floor. Someone was on the other side. She knelt down. She pushed the note through. She stood up. She went back to her chair. She sat down. She waited. He opened the door. He came into the waiting room with the note in his hand, and he stood for a moment, letting his eyes move through the room. The chairs, the people waiting, the water cooler, the child at the far end of the row of chairs, who was sitting with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the door, and who, when she saw him, did something that he would think about for a long time after. She did not look away. That was the thing. Every adult in the room had registered him entering, the cut, the size, the presence, and had done the various things that adults do when they register these things, which ranged from looking away quickly to arranging their body to suggest they had not noticed. The children had looked with the honest curiosity of children who have not yet learned to look away. But Grace Whitmore was not looking with curiosity. She was looking with the focused, unashamed attention of a person who has just done something they were not sure would work and is watching for the result. She was looking to see if it worked. Mac crossed the room. He stopped in front of her chair. He crouched down, the way he always crouched when he was talking to a child, because talking down at someone is a different conversation from talking to them. And he held up the note. "Grace," he said. She looked at the note. She nodded. "My name's Mac," he said. "I was on the other side of the door." She looked at his face. She looked at the cut. She said, "Are you a good guy or a bad guy?" He thought about it. "I'm trying to be a good one," he said. She considered this. She said, "Oak," she said, "they're going to make me go live with someone I don't know, and Grandma will be alone. She makes my lunches with notes in them." She paused. "On Mondays and Thursdays." He looked at her. He said, "Is your grandma here?" Grace pointed. Iris Whitmore was sitting 2 chairs down, watching him with the particular contained stillness of a woman who has seen her granddaughter slide off a chair and go to a door and come back and sit down, and is now watching a large man in a motorcycle cut crouch in front of that granddaughter and talk to her, and who has not moved, because the granddaughter's face is calm, and the man's hands are at his sides, and something about the configuration, though she cannot explain it, does not require intervention. Mac stood. He walked to Iris. He held out his hand. He said, "Mac Deaton, Lone Star Riders, Denton chapter." He paused. "Your granddaughter put a note under the door." Iris looked at his hand. She shook it. She said, "She did?" "Yes, ma'am," he said. He took the note from his pocket and held it out. Iris read it. She was quiet for a moment. She said, "She's been worried about me." "I figured," he said. He looked at the legal aid attorney, who was sitting on Iris's other side. "Are you representing her in the hearing?" The attorney, a young woman named Danielle Reyes, who had been doing family law for 3 years, and who had the specific tiredness of a person doing important work on inadequate resources, said, he said, "What time is the hearing?" 3:30, she said. 20 minutes. He looked at his phone. 9% battery. He said, "What do you need?" Danielle looked at him. She said, "I'm sorry?" "For the hearing," he said. "What do you need that you don't have?" She looked at Iris. She looked at Grace, who was watching from her chair with her hands folded in her lap. She said, "Character witnesses." The legal aid office doesn't have resources to prepare them for today. We knew about this hearing for 2 weeks, but the caseload. She stopped. She looked at him. Why, he said, I'm the chapter president. Our chapter has been in this county for 18 years. I know people. He paused. And I have 11 minutes before my phone dies. Tell me what a character witness needs to say. Danielle looked at him for a long moment. She told him. He made 3 calls. The first call was to Pastor Leon Avery at First Community Church on University Drive, who had known Iris Whitmore for 14 years, and who answered in the specific alert way of a man who knows when a call at 3 in the afternoon on a Thursday is not a casual call. Max said, Leon, I need you at the family on Hickory Street in 15 minutes. It's about Iris, Leon said. I'll get my coat. The second call was to a woman named Suki Park, who had been Grace's kindergarten teacher and who now taught first grade at Denton Elementary, and who had written, 8 months ago when the case first opened, a letter to the court about Grace's adjustment and stability that had been included in the case file, and which Danielle had cited but had not had the resources to follow up. Suki answered on the first ring and said yes before Mac had finished explaining. The third call was to his chapter vice president, a man who asked one question, what do you need? And listens and said how many and when. Max said, however many come 3:30. His phone died at 3:22. He stood in the family court hallway outside courtroom 3 and looked at the dead phone and looked at the door and looked at Grace, who had followed him into the hallway and was now standing beside Iris and the legal aid attorney, all 3 of them looking back at him. He put the phone in his pocket. He said, Pastor Long is on his way. Mrs. Park from the school is on his way. Some people from my chapter are coming. Danielle said, character witnesses need to be sworn. I know, he said. Leon's testified before. Suki's written a letter already. She knows the file. Have them speak to Grace's stability and Iris's capacity as a caregiver. Keep it to what they've seen directly. He looked at Danielle. She was 26 years old and exhausted and doing work that deserved more support than it was getting. And she was looking at him the way people look at something they did not anticipate and are deciding whether to trust. He said, you don't have to call them, but they're coming. If they can help, let them. She looked at him. She said, okay. The door to the hallway opened. Pastor Leon came through it at 3:27, slightly out of breath from running from the parking lot, in his coat with his collar straight. He shook Iris's hand and looked at Grace and said quietly to Grace, I hear you wrote a letter. Grace said it was a note. Even better, he said. Suki Park arrived at 3:29. She went directly to Grace. She said, hey, kiddo, Mrs. Park, you're not supposed to be here. Your friend called me, Suki said. She looked at Mac. Grace looked at Mac. She said, you called my teacher? He said, she has things to say about you. The judge should hear them. Grace looked at him for a moment. She said, the judge hasn't heard me either. The hallway was quiet. He looked at Danielle. Danielle said, a guardian ad litem speaks for her. The judge can choose to hear directly from a child if, what does the judge need to do that? Max said. A request, Danielle said, from her guardian of record with the child's consent. He looked at Iris. Iris looked at Grace. She said, baby, do you want to talk to the judge? You don't have to, but if you want to. Can I bring the notes? Iris frowned. What notes? The Monday and Thursday notes, Grace said. The ones you put in my lunch. I have them in a box under my bed. Iris was very still for a moment. She said, I didn't know you kept them. I keep everything, Grace said. She looked at the courtroom door. She said, I want to tell the judge about the notes. The hearing ran 47 minutes. Pastor Leon testified for 6 of them. Suki Park testified for 9. With reference to the school records she had provided to Danielle in the hallway, and which Danielle had spent 11 minutes reviewing and flagging before the hearing opened. The guardian ad litem's report was read into the record. It recommended continued placement with the grandmother while Kara's rehabilitation was monitored through a structured visitation plan, noting that the child's attachment to the current placement was significant and that disruption carried documented developmental risk. Then Grace Whitmore was brought in. She sat in the chair beside the judge's bench that the bailiff placed for her, and she sat up straight the way her grandmother had taught her to sit, and she looked at the judge, a woman named Honorable Patricia Voss, who had been on the family court bench for 16 years and who, in those 16 years, had heard from perhaps 40 children directly, and who received Grace with the specific and careful attention she gave to all of them. Grace did not have the shoebox, but she had memorized the notes. She recited 4 of them from memory in the careful printing voice she used when she was reading aloud and wanted to get every word right. You are exactly who you are supposed to be. The gap between your teeth is my favorite thing. Tuesday is coming, and it will be better. You are not alone in this house. You will never be alone in this house. The courtroom was very quiet. Judge Voss looked at Grace for a long time. She said, "Grace, do you understand what today is about?" Grace said, "It's about where I'm going to live." "That's right," the judge said. "Is there anything you want me to know?" Grace thought about it with the focused seriousness she brought to things that mattered. She said, "My grandma makes my lunches with notes in them on Mondays and Thursdays because those are my hard days. And she never told me she did it because of my hard days. She just did it. I didn't find out until I was 6. She paused. "I think that's what a good person does. They do the thing and they don't tell you why." She looked at the judge. "I want to stay with her," she said. "Please." The sound reached the courthouse parking lot at 417. Engines. Mac heard them from inside the building, from the hallway where he had been waiting since the hearing opened, where he was not a party to the proceeding and had no standing, and had done everything he could do, and was now waiting the way you wait when you have done everything, and the rest is someone else's to decide. He heard the engines, and he went to the window at the end of the hallway. The parking lot was filling, not 100 bikes, not 300, 41 motorcycles, moving into the lot in the specific unhurried way of people who have been called somewhere and have come and are not in a hurry because they are already where they need to be. Lone Star Riders, with 7 members from the neighboring Cross Timbers chapter who had heard from Heron in the hour that the hearing was running and had made the decision to come in the way these decisions get made when the reason is clear. 41 motorcycles, engines cutting one by one, the parking lot going quiet. Mac looked at the clock on the hallway wall. The courtroom door opened. Danielle came out first. She looked at Mac. She said, "She's staying with her grandmother." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "The judge?" "Full placement," Danielle said. "Supervised visitation for the mother. Structured transition plan 6-month review." She paused. Judge Voss said, for the record, that Grace's testimony was among the most clearly reasoned she had heard in 16 years on this bench. She paused again. He said the part about the notes. He looked at the courtroom door. He said, "Whose idea was it to let Grace speak?" Danielle looked at him. She said, "Technically, it was the guardian ad litem's recommendation after reviewing the case file." She stopped. She said, "You told me to file the request," he said. "I said Danielle could file it if she wanted to." "You said." She stopped again. She looked at him. "You knew." "Grace told me what she wanted to say," he said. The courtroom door opened wider. Iris came out. Grace was beside her, holding her hand with both of hers, in the specific grip of a child who has been sitting very still for a very long time and is now holding on to the thing that matters most. She saw Mac. She crossed the hallway. She held out something. It was a piece of paper, folded 4 times precisely. Small, the size of something torn from the corner of a larger sheet. He took it. He unfolded it. It said, "Thank you from Grace. I am still 6. He looked at her. She said, "I made it while the hearing was going. I had paper." He said, "Of course you did." She said, "There's more on the back." He turned it over. On the back, in the same careful printing, "P.S. There are motorcycles in the parking lot, are they?" "For us." He looked at her. He said, "They're for..." Her face did the thing that faces do when they have been held very still for a very long time and are finally allowed to move. He looked at Iris, whose face was doing something else, something older and more complicated, the expression of a woman who has been fighting for something for 6 months and has just been told the fight is over and does not yet fully believe, which will take days to process, which is the correct amount of time. He said, "Ma'am, you might want to see the parking lot." She went to the window. She stood for a long time looking at the 41 motorcycles and the men and women standing beside them in the late afternoon light. She said, "My granddaughter did this," he said. She sent the note. The rest of it followed. Iris was quiet. Then she said, without turning from the window, "She kept every note I ever put in her lunch." "I know," he said. "I didn't know that," she said. "I didn't know she kept them." She was quiet for a long time. He did not fill the silence. Then she said, "You were just waiting in the hallway." "Elevator was out," he said. She turned from the window. She looked at him. She said, "I'm glad it was out." He was in San Antonio by 9 that evening. His sister met him at the door with the specific exasperation of a woman who has been expecting someone since 6 and is expressing through her exasperation the relief of their arrival. He came in and ate what was on the stove and sat at the kitchen table with his niece and her fiancée and his sister and the wedding talk that had been going on for months, and he was present for all of it, which was the best he could do, and which was that night enough. In his chest pocket he had 2 folded notes. The first one, "Please help me. My name is Grace. I am 6. The second one, "Thank you. From Grace. I am still 6. He kept them in the same pocket. At the wedding on Saturday, his sister found him standing at the edge of the reception, watching his niece dance, and she stood beside him and said, "You're smiling," she said. "What happened?" He thought about the hallway and the elevator and the note under the door and a 6-year-old who had sent it on the chance that whoever was on the other side was someone worth sending it to. He said, "I was in the right place." She said, "You're never in the right place on purpose." He looked at his niece on the dance floor. He said, "I know," she said. So what was different this time? He thought about the gap at the bottom of the door, about the precise folded square that had stopped against his boot, about the 6-year-old on the other side who had decided, with the specific logic of a child who reads 2 years above her level and has been listening carefully for 6 months, that someone on the other side of a door was worth the risk of asking. He said, "A kid decided I was worth trusting." His sister looked at him. She said, "And were you?" He thought about it. He said, "I tried to be." She put her arm around him. They watched the dancing. The 2 notes were in his chest pocket, folded 4 times each, the way they had been folded when they arrived. He intended to keep them there. There are doors in every building, and on the other side of some of them, there are children who have been very still for a very long time, and who have decided, after much deliberation, that the person on the other side might be worth the risk of asking. The only question is whether we are worth the asking. Mac Deaton was sitting on a courthouse floor with a dead phone until a wedding and a chapter president's obligations and a life that was going toward San Antonio. A 6-year-old decided he was the right person. He tried to be. That is all any of us can do. If this story reached you today, if you believe that the right person on the other side of the door changes everything, hit like and share it with someone who still knows how to be that person. Subscribe so you never miss the next one, and drop a comment below. Tell me about a moment when a child trusted you, or a moment when you trusted someone against the odds and they came through. I want to read everyone, and if this one got you, type Grace in the comments. I'll know what it means.